our law firm unapologetically stands up for the rights of the accused.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode, Military Justice Today with Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams of Capovilla and Williams. I'm Matt Starosiak. We just had an interesting conversation off air. Rob said that he was going to Jim Rome me.
You better be careful about this.
I'm assuming he's talking about the Chris Everett incident, but I'm not sure.
I don't want to talk about Ohio State football. I don't want to talk about the rankings. I will put money on the line that
Chris.
Why doesn't he
say
want
it
to talk
again?
about it?
Ohio State loses one game. Everybody asks, "Oh my God, the dynasty! Oh, they're not going to get back."
I thought we're not talking about this.
They're in disarray. They lost a game.
All right, here let's do this. Let's be neutral though, because we don't want to talk about our schools or anything like that. So let me just ask you a quick question. We'll do this and then we'll jump in to today's important topic.
Sounds good to me.
Clemson. Your feelings on Clemson still being ranked with 2 losses. The coaches poll has them at 19. Okay, and the AP has them at 25.
All right.
They're a 2-loss team. They're the only 2-loss team on the board. There's a number of 1-loss teams on the board, but what are your feelings about Clemson being ranked in the top, 25 with 2 losses this early in the year?
All right.
Hold on, Mickey Williams.
I feel bad for Clemson, honestly. I think that the ACC really needed them to do well. And I think Rob will talk about this, is that what Clemson is going through right now is a rebuilding process. Rob preaches a lot about how when you lose somebody like Trevor Lawrence, you can't just replace him, right? When you lose your number one wide receivers in your offensive line, you can't just grab a 19-year-old kid and say, yeah, you can play as well as these 22, 23-year-olds who were there the year before. And so, unlike what you have in the SEC where you have talent just in your backyard, Clemson's got to go out there and recruit. And I think that they are in that phase where they're just kind of off cycle right now. And I think next year they'll probably be pretty good. But this year is a down year for them, which stinks because they were the ACC's best shot at getting a team in the college playoffs.
This is a wise man here.
And that's exactly what I told him in the car this morning. That's why he said it. Rob preaches it.
He just repeated it.
Look, we want every year, everybody expects Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, Alabama to just be phenomenal. And guess what? Ohio State has the youngest team in the conference this year. Clemson's got one of the youngest teams in the country this year. You're replacing Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence. It's not that easy. Let's see where Ohio State and Clemson are in November. Let's see. I would tend to think that there's not going to be a lot of teams in the country that are going to want to take on Clemson or Ohio State in November.
All right. So based on the AP Top 25, Wake Forest would beat Clemson today. Do you believe that? Do you believe Wake Forest would beat Clemson?
I think Clemson, even more so than Ohio State, Clemson has some real serious problems on offense. Ohio State hasn't clicked. They didn't take Oregon as seriously as they should have. They've had some really great quarters and some bad quarters, but Clemson's just been bad on offense all year. I mean, even in the Oregon game with Ohio State, we put up like 400 yards of offense in the second half. It's just not clicking on all cylinders yet. Clemson's just been, their offense has been non-existent, right? I think they put up, their quarterback threw for 111 yards against NC State, and including overtime. That's a bad,
all right,
bad day.
I want predictions while we're on record.
Let's do it.
Okay. Your pick for the 4 playoff teams, Mickey.
Oh, that's tough because there's so much volatility.
Right now, just so you know, there's a little bit of difference in the 2 polls. So both of them have Alabama, Georgia, Oregon, 1, 2, 3. AP has Penn State as 4, and Coach's poll has Oklahoma.
I think Alabama is definitely going to be there unless they somehow lose and then lose the SEC championship.
Yeah, that won't happen.
So Bama definitely. I think that Iowa has a very good chance, or even Penn State has a very good chance of getting in the Final Four. As much as I love Oregon, I love those guys, and I'm so happy they won against Ohio State. The first time out of the 9 times before that they played.
They earned it. They outplayed them.
I don't think that they've got an issue on their defense, as strange as that sounds. They allowed, I think, 200 yards of offense against an unranked Arizona team who had lost 3 games going into it. I think they've lost 19 games They're like on a losing streak, like never before.
What about Georgia? Are they in for you?
Yeah, I like Georgia,
So you like
too.
Alabama, Georgia.
I like Penn State. I like Iowa. Oklahoma, I think, is going to have a hard time. Cincinnati, I think, has a good shot, believe it or not.
But dark horse.
If they beat Notre Dame,
Yeah,
they got a
dark
real
horse.
shot. If they beat Notre Dame, they got a real shot.
Yeah.
All right, so you're thinking Alabama, Georgia.
I think two
Penn
SEC
State.
teams for sure. I think it's either going to be Alabama, Georgia, or Alabama, Florida, which I don't know. Maybe Florida can get in there. Maybe they can get lucky and beat Georgia, but we'll see. I think they play this next weekend.
Capovilla, who's your top four?
Well,
I mean, we know your number one is Ohio State. They're going to be number one.
That's not how I'm not like that as a fan. I think as much as I hate it, and I truly hate the Georgia Bulldogs, I think the Georgia Bulldogs are the best team in the country this year. I think Alabama is the second best team, so I would have Georgia and Bama going in the playoff. I think Penn State is going to run the table. I think they're going to beat the Buckeyes. I think they're going to go to the playoff. So I think that's going to be 3 of the 4. I'm not convinced Oklahoma is very good. I think Oregon's going to have a loss or 2. So for my 4th team, I'm going to go with a 1-loss Oregon that gets in after they win the Pac-12 championship. Then I think you're going to have the 1 seed will crush Oregon. I think you'll have I think the 1 seed will probably be Bama. They're going to crush Oregon. And I think you're going to have Georgia just totally shut down Penn State. I think that score is going to be like 34-17. And I think you're going to have an Alabama-Georgia national championship. And I think the next year, Ohio State's going to go undefeated and win the national championship.
I'm going to substitute my top 4 playoff for another prediction that both Michigan teams beat Ohio State this year.
Wow.
When's the last time that happened?
And I think easily. I think they're going to easily beat them. I don't think it's going to be close.
Wow.
We had this.
Well, it'll be close for like the first 2 minutes.
We had this conversation in the last, or one of the last podcasts. What state are you from, Matt?
I can't say it like you say it because it's vulgarity.
You're
You
from
can't use
Michigan.
it. That's not what you call it.
You're from
That's not what
Michigan.
you
No,
call it.
I call it. I don't usually use the
we
M
know,
word. Yeah.
right.
You're from Michigan. I feel very confident Ohio State's going to destroy Michigan and Michigan State and bring order back to our galaxy.
All right.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
The predictions are on record. We have them, and we'll see how it all shakes out.
The revenge tour, Mickey, 2019. Michigan's
remember.
favored, and they get crushed. Urban could have put 70 on them, but he wimped out.
In the meantime, let's get to our topic today, which is ROTC disenrollments. Basically, charges or accusations or made against people that are in the ROTC. And Mickey, you're our resident expert on this, so we're going to let you do most of the heavy lifting today. But why don't we just talk a little bit, especially for somebody like me who's not familiar with the process and kind of what somebody signs up for. But what is kind of the contract that somebody in the ROTC signs, and then how does that morph into trouble later on if they do something, in terms of misconduct or behavior that's not acceptable, and what happens? Let's just walk through kind of what happens and what the process looks like, and then maybe even touch on some of the parental involvement in a process like this.
It's kind of funny, actually. We thought that college football talk was going to be way off base, but here we are talking at least
about college.
collegiately,
That's right,
right?
yeah.
Or here we go. So
That's
that was a
right.
good precursor. So
Yeah.
don't cut the discussion about college football out. It matters.
That's
It's how-
right.
It was an intro.
People are going to think this is a sports podcast.
You were going to get bad ratings in this podcast.
Yeah.
ROTC, so the Reserve Officer Training Corps, it spans the major services, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the Marine Corps. Coast Guard does not have an ROTC program, believe it or not.
They have a service academy, though.
They have a service academy, but that's separate and apart from ROTC.
Space Force? No?
Well, I guess
I don't know.
I
don't think they do yet. No.
Yeah,
Well, our guy's going to check us.
They do have awesome.
Our fact checkers.
They
now.
do have awesome patches now, though. Yeah.
So a kid is in college, and he decides that he wants to join the military through the ROTC program, and the benefit of that is twofold. One, you get your entire college paid for. Everything's paid for, and then you also have a guaranteed job at the end of it. You commission into the military, whether that's the Navy or the Army, Marine Corps, whatever. You're now an officer. You start off, you don't have to go to OCS or anything. You go to ROTC and you come in, you're a second lieutenant, and then you go out and you
So you come in as an officer?
your commissioning source is going to be ROTC. And so now you're an officer and you go to Bullock afterwards, which is the basic officer leadership course following ROTC. So that's the benefit of it. The contract you sign is a contract that you get while in college. And the contract lays out what benefits you're going to get and also what could happen to you if you fail to comply with the contract or if you breach the contract. And essentially what happens is they've got basically all these medical reasons that you have to satisfy, your basic stuff, right? You got to stay healthy. You can't get in a car wreck and get paralyzed or something because then now you can't serve, obviously. But then there are other things that aren't as apparent. Mental health stuff, right? If you suffer from a mental health disorder, a lot of times that will disqualify you from being able to be commissioned into the military. But a lot of people don't know that at first when you join it. The contract also lays out the type of misconduct that could get you kicked out of the program. And the problem with the getting kicked out is the punishment. If the benefit is that good, the punishment's going to be just that much worse. The punishment that you're facing if you get disenrolled from the ROTC program is either A, you have to pay back all that money, right? All that money that they pay for college and the training that you went through, because you have to, each summer you do some internships and you go to this thing called advanced camp and so on. You got to pay the money back that they spent for you to go to those things.
So that gets tacked on top of it.
Oh, that gets tacked on top of it. And you're looking at, if your tuition is $30,000 a year and you did it for 4 years, right? It's $120,000 plus whatever else. So you're looking at maybe $150,000 to $160,000. Wow. Now, you have another option if they decide to disenroll you. And what will happen is you just enlist. So you're not going to be an officer. You're going to enlist for 2 years, but that will forgive your entire debt. And
I would go, if it was me personally and I was an ROTC cadet, I would enlist if I was facing some kind of action like that. Quite frankly, that's a lot of unnecessary student loan debt. But I am not as well versed in ROTC as Mickey is, even though I was a cadet and he wasn't. And I remember being a cadet. And I remember, I went to a small private school for undergrad, and we used to have to, on every Thursday, we used to have to commute to Bowling Green State, which is where the primary, where we would do our ROTC stuff. I think later on it may have become Ohio State, but anyway, that's where we did our stuff. And I didn't know a lot of this when I was a cadet myself. I had never thought about it, but we had kids. We had a guy that got a DUI. We had a couple guys failed drug tests, things like that. I actually served with an ROTC with a guy who was later killed in combat. And I didn't know any of these things when I was a cadet. They don't really do a very good job of kind of breaking this down. I think like a lot of things when you're young, you just want that scholarship, you sign the contract, and you don't really think about, geez, if I make a mistake, what could happen here?
So you sign this contract. It lays out the benefits that you're to receive and then, the consequences if you don't hold up your end.
Right.
And then what are the most common issues that kids run into? I mean, what are the ones you see most often? I mean, I could probably guess what they are, but what do you see?
I mean, typical college stuff generally, you see the drug hots, like Rob said, the DUIs, the partying too much. That happens. Academic reasons, you've got to maintain a certain GPA to be able to stay in and continue on. If you get expelled, obviously that's going to breach the agreement. But then you also have another facet that bleeds into it, and we talk about this, I think, every podcast: sexual assault allegations.
Yeah,
right?
we
Sexual harassment.
We get a lot of the sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations from the ROTC level and the Title IX level. Quite frankly,
that's what I was going to say. Yeah. They typically begin because it's usually another classmate, typically not somebody within the program, the ROTC program, another classmate within the university, who makes the allegation, goes to Title IX, they do an investigation, and if they find that this stuff occurred, they've got their own process for expelling you if they want to, or giving you some sort of sanctions, right? That then gets turned over to ROTC. ROTC then looks at it and then initiates their own investigation to either corroborate or refute what Title IX found.
So there's some sort of notification process between the school and ROTC.
Yeah, there is.
I would assume they're very...
And you got to remember, so the ROTC program has professors. They have a guy or a gal named a PNS or a PMS, and that stands for Professor of Naval Sciences or Professor of Military Science. and they're like the battalion commander of whoever's there at the university.
Yeah.
And that person is the boss, and they are the professor there at that school, and they teach all those courses on the military.
Okay. So,
Mickey, well, I was just going to say real quick, too, a lot of times we get calls, not only are they facing, ROTC issue, but sometimes they're under investigation from a local law enforcement for sexual assault, too.
Yeah.
Right? So these kind of cases can originate from a civilian, right? Just a civilian law enforcement complaint that has nothing to do with the university or the ROTC program. Am I right about that?
No, you are right. And what's interesting is you are under an obligation to report those sorts of things to your PMS or PNS. And if you don't and they find out about it, that's another breach
separate.
of contract. Yeah.
Right. And then what about drug testing? So are they drug testing these kids regularly? Or?
Oh, all the
Yeah,
time.
yes.
It's
They
at least
are?
once
Yeah.
a month.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
So-
used to take drug tests every, you go on leave or holiday break. The first thing you do when you got back is you take a drug test.
Really?
Oh, yeah, all the time. More than even than the reserves.
Yeah, it's a lot. And because they want to make sure that you are going to follow the rules.
Yeah.
Right? That's basically what they're looking at. I need to make one thing clear, though, because we're talking a lot about the scholarships. There's a period of time where you are not obligated to be under a scholarship in ROTC. I think it's about 2 years that you have to
Yeah,
make
it's
that
usually
decision.
the first 2 years.
If you are somehow disenrolled before that you hit that 2-year mark, then you don't have to pay back or serve those 2 years. But once you
Have
sign,
you accepted the scholarship? You're talking about you could be in school for 2 years and not accept a scholarship from ROTC?
that's right. You're kind of auditing a little. I mean,
Why
you're
would
doing
somebody
everything.
do that? Just to make sure it's for them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can be uncontracted. So I was not contracted. I was a college baseball player. I hurt my shoulder. I wasn't going anywhere anyway to play baseball, right? So I said, well, I really wanted to be a JAG attorney. I knew that even as a young guy at 18. So I talked to a guy who had been a Marine Corps JAG, and he said, well, if you're serious about it, I think it would help your application or whatever to go join the ROTC program and be an uncontracted cadet. And I remember in law school, I had to go in front of the academic dean and stuff because I was getting grades. I was getting grades from ROTC, and you'd always get A's, right? Because I was in ROTC my first year of law school, and I would get an A, and there was this big thing in my class, should that A count towards my law school GPA? And ultimately, they decided that it would not count towards my law
that's
school
a bummer.
GPA. Yeah, so I remember going in front of the academic dean about that, hey, these guys only have to focus on their classes. Every Thursday, I got to go run a bunch of miles and ruck march and, play with weapons and whatever. It should count, but it didn't.
So do you recommend, just as an aside, I know we're not talking about recommendations on doing it or not doing it, but how do you feel about that kind of, I'm going to call it a trial period. I know it's not, but if you did the uncontracted,
yeah.
do you think that's a good thing for folks to do?
100%. There's benefits and disadvantages to it. So the major benefit is if you do get in trouble, you decide it's not for you, you can get out.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a
Without
good way.
owing a ton of money.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. The downside is if you are going to be disenrolled, your due process rights are severely limited if you're not contracted versus if you are contracted.
Interesting.
Right? So that's the big difference. Essentially, if you are not contracted, the PMS or the brigade commander above the PMS can just summarily kick you out. Right? You don't really have any due process rights at that point. You're just kind of auditing the classes anyway. Don't come back.
Yeah.
You're done.
Yeah.
If you are contracted, that starts this whole new chain of events.
Well, let's talk about
to get
that.
you disenrolled. Okay.
Let's talk about the process, because I think we had a whole episode that we've done previously on parents. I think this would be everybody wants to know about this, but I think parents especially, what is the process if somebody's, accused of misconduct? And
so it varies from service to service. But generally speaking, the process is the same in this regard. You're going to be notified, right? You're going to be notified by your PMS that they are moving forward with a disenrollment. In the Navy, Marine Corps, they call it, I believe it's a performance review board. It's basically the same thing. Now, what that means is you're under investigation. They are going to investigate whatever allegation is against you. And then that PMS or PNS is going to take that investigation and make a recommendation to the brigade commander, who will then initiate the disenrollment proceedings if he or she sees that that's what should happen.
okay.
Right? What will happen also is you're going to get what's called a leave of absence in the Army. It's basically a flag. It's saying, hey, you're not allowed to come to any more of the courses until this whole thing is figured out, and you're not going to get paid anymore because you're getting a stipend while you're in that program.
Right.
So they're gonna put a cease to that, and then during that time, while you're being investigated, that's when you and your lawyer start gathering all the evidence.
Yeah.
And you have an opportunity to meet with this investigator, right, before they make a decision whether or not to send it to a hearing. You have an opportunity to meet with the investigator, and that might be in your best interest. It might not be. It just depends on the case. The one thing I'll say, if you're in the Air Force ROTC, that is the only opportunity you're going to have to make your case, is to meet with that investigator. You don't get a hearing. Like, that is it.
Really? And that's just in the Air Force?
That's just in the Air Force.
I find that to be just so shocking. I think it just shows so shocking. They can force you to pay back hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, and you don't even get an opportunity for a hearing. But I know that's the way it is. I just don't think it's very fair.
Yeah.
So in the Air Force, you would just make your case to that investigator.
You have
I did this. I didn't do it.
You have 5 days to do it.
Wow.
They notify you. Got 5 days later, you're meeting with that investigator. So
how long does it normally take, like outside of the Air Force, the process of gathering evidence? And
months. Generally speaking, once you've been notified or your investigation, it takes a long time for that to happen and get up through the chain. It gives you a lot of time to prepare, to gather the evidence. And then if they decide that they want to go forward, that also takes a good bit of time to set up the board, because that follows generally the same procedures as an administrative hearing.
Yeah, they're very similar at that point, with obviously one big difference when you get to the hearing.
Similar to a separation board that you would have if you were...
Well, I want Rob to talk about the biggest difference.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just crazy to me.
Yeah, so when you're in the Army and you're notified of separation, right, you have the right to this board, and it is really a mini trial. You have a right to voir dire the board. You have a right to an opening statement, closing arguments, present evidence, cross-examine. Your attorney can do all of that for you at a board, right? Yeah. At an ROTC disenrollment board, however, much like a Title IX board, the attorney doesn't have the right to litigate on your behalf. The person being accused, the client for us, has to represent themselves. Now, the attorney can be there, and our job is to prep the case like we were litigating. We literally have to write opening statements and cross-examinations and practice it with our client over and over again, kind of like we're back in law school and we're helping out folks in moot court. But the attorney doesn't have a right to talk, which to me, I think is absurd. I think number one, I think it's biased. I think it's unfair. I think that it's a miscarriage of justice because, like Mickey said, if you're kicked out of the ROTC program, you might have to pay back a lot of money, or give up 2 years of your life. Your attorney should be able to argue for you because there's enough at stake where the attorney should be able to do it for you. That's the purpose of hiring an attorney. But the ROTC boards don't allow it to happen, just like the Title IX boards don't. And I think in both cases, it's a miscarriage of justice.
I think that's shocking, too. I mean, what if you had somebody who was absolutely petrified to get up and talk in front of even 2 or 3 people?
It doesn't matter.
Which I'm sure you probably have seen.
And sometimes, we have cases on the ROTC level that are serious cases. I mean, sexual assault allegations, we get those all of the time.
Yeah.
And we've got some, 18, 19, 20-year-old kid who doesn't know the first thing about the law trying to litigate on his own behalf. If he doesn't have an attorney or she doesn't have an attorney, first of all, I don't know how they do it. And then with the attorney, our job is to get them prepped, get them ready. We go over it, practice it. And plus, I think having the attorney there, it ensures the board is not going to take advantage of your client, right? When there's no attorney there.
But what if they tried to? What could you do?
The attorney could stand up for the client, just not on the record. Right.
Understood.
Yeah, and they're not going to do that.
There's a review process. Everything gets routed back up through because you have the board. They make a recommendation, so their word isn't final. This is what's so crazy to me. So they make a recommendation about what should happen to this cadet or midshipman if you're in the Navy. So that recommendation could be retain them, let them go on, let them commission, or it could be disenroll them. That gets routed through the legal shop all the way up to the main command, and it's usually a 2-star command, right? In the Army, it goes up to Cadet Command at Fort Knox. In the Navy, it goes all the way up to I think it's SecNav or the Secretary of the Navy, but it's delegated down a little bit. The Air Force, it goes up to the AFROTC commander. They have the ability, because you're not even in the military, to override whatever the board says. So before when we were talking about
Either way?
Either
Override
way.
it either way.
Either way. So if the board said that the misconduct did not happen, right? If they say the sexual assault did not happen, retain him. Commander can come back and say, I don't care. Kick him out.
Just off the evidence they receive.
Yeah. So it's very important that not only do you do a great job at the board, but then you also have a good prep, like a good pack or whatever that goes up on top of it up to that commander. I have not seen that happen, though. Typically what you see is just the opposite. You get a guy who maybe they showed up late to classes a couple of times. They recommend disenrollment, and obviously the guy is remorseful. He's got a good track record, good PT, whatever, and then the commander will give him another chance. So
you see it get flipped that way.
I see it get flipped that way.
The cadet.
Yeah, I haven't seen a sexual assault that was unfounded kick the guy out anyway.
Yeah.
Right, I haven't seen that happen. So that's why it's so important to win that board. But those boards, like Rob said, those boards, when it's not you litigating and you're sitting there watching your guy and you know what kind of question to ask that witness.
Yeah,
right?
that's hard.
It's tough.
That's hard.
I just can't imagine, and I guess that's maybe part of you want responsible people serving, and so maybe that's one more test. But it just seems odd that you would ask somebody to do that without really having any training outside of some prep with their attorney beforehand.
It's not right. I mean, I don't think it's right. Just like I don't think it's right that you can expel somebody under Title IX from a university on a sexual assault allegation, and they don't have a right to have an attorney litigate for them.
Yeah.
These things carry long-term consequences for the people that are involved. And it's one of the things that, quite frankly, bothers me an immense amount, right? These people need voices. But I do think they stand a much better chance if they hire the right attorney to get them ready, the right team, right? One of the things that Mickey does at our firm is he heads up this part of the firm, and we get our investigator on it. We typically have one of our associates or one of our paralegals also help out. We put together a very nice packet for these folks and put them in as good a position as we can to help them succeed, because there's a lot, there's a lot on the line. Most folks who go to ROTC don't want to be enlisted. That's why they go to ROTC, right? And if they decide they hate the Army, they got to pay back a lot of money. I mean, as a guy who had student loan debt, I can tell you it's stressful to have student loan debt.
And how would that get paid back? You would work out a payment plan and be like a student loan? Because obviously nobody's going to be able to pay it back in a lump sum.
It's a debt to the military. DFAS will send you a letter saying you have a debt and it's this amount, and you have this amount of time to pay it unless you call us.
Yeah.
And then we'll go through payment plans. That's typically what happens.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So you have student loan debt, and it does accrue interest too, just like student loans would.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me.
How is it? I mean, I think the answer to this question is probably obvious, but how is it emotionally for the cadet, their family going through this? I mean, I would have to think it's kind of devastating for them,
especially the sexual assault ones, because at that level, if the locals aren't prosecuting it, and they're basically just going off of a college, a scorned lover, a lot of times they make the allegation. Oh, it's very, very stressful. It's frustrating because here's this young man, just like we've talked about before. He's in the university. He's going to be an Army officer or a Marine officer, something like that. Something he's very proud of doing. It's all being taken away because of an allegation. It's terrifying for him, right? And not only that, now they might have to pay back all this money that they otherwise wouldn't have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the fears that I have is this process we've created with Title IX and ROTC disenrollment boards is going to bleed into the active duty side too. That with all these changes we're talking about with the military justice system, that essentially they're going to create something very similar through the administrative process of the Army or the other branches, where they're going to be able to just kind of notify you don't have a right to an attorney. Now, Mickey will say, hey, there's a lot of federal regulations in place to protect against that, and that's true. But, I think one of the things we have to be very cautious of as we continue to move down have this discussion and this conversation about sexual assault in the military, which is a worthy conversation to have, and folks on both sides have good points. One thing that we have to be very, very concerned about is that the rights of the people being accused are not forgotten, because just as a victim has a voice and should have a voice, there's no question about that. I don't know any logical thinking human being that wouldn't agree with that statement. The accused also has a voice, and that person has rights. And those rights go back to the founding of this very country, right? They're tenets that our country has been built upon. And I do get very concerned as we talk about ROTC and we talk about Title IX and we see what's developing
through the military justice and sexual assault discussions that are happening at the highest levels of government, that we're not going to, as a country, make sure that the people who are accused have the tools they need to fight back.
Yeah.
Because, Matt, I say it every single time. False allegations happen. People comment on these podcasts when they hear me say it. They call me a victim hater or a victim shamer, all these kind of things. That couldn't be further from the truth. But I'm also somebody who fundamentally believes that false allegations happen because we've seen it. We have seen it. In real life, we've seen people lose everything over false allegations.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think if you're passionate about victims' rights, then you have to be passionate about the accused too, because that accused could be your father, your brother,
Right.
you know, and false accusations. Some folks would argue that they're rare. Maybe they are. I don't know. I don't know how rare they are. But even one is bad if it's your brother or your father. So
Right.
I you know, we're a little off topic here, but I agree with you on that. There's so much at stake.
Well-
and so we need to make sure that the due process is solid. And,
Right.
you know, it should, in my opinion, be more and more solid as the seriousness of the charge escalates.
And I think it all is really one kind of argument, because I have absolutely seen scholars and political commentators talk about moving the military the separation process to a Title IX forum.
Yeah.
And that's why I make these comments. Those arguments, discussions are being had, you know, right now, and nothing, you know, it's hard to imagine that somebody that would be accused would have a fair hearing if they're not able to do the things they need to do to win a case.
Yeah, it's asking a lot for an individual who's untrained. But
Right.
all right, Mickey. So then a decision is made. It goes up for ultimate resolution. Sounds like, except for the
Yeah.
Air Force. Mm-hmm. And then what happens?
Well, that takes some time. The decision is made, like you said, and if the service member or the cadet or midshipman is allowed to continue on, then they continue on.
Yeah.
Right? If they're not, then they have to, you know, I guess face their fate, as it were.
Is that the hardest part? The uncertainty, the time it takes, the uncertainty for the cadet and their family.
I did one. This was a North Georgia case. I want to remember that we had like 5 or 6 from North Georgia.
I do remember, yeah.
And it took, I want to say, from the date of the hearing, we had a favorable result. It took about 3-4 months before we heard back from Cadet Command about what was going to happen. Luckily, it was favorable, but, you know, it just takes a long time.
Yeah.
And during that time, your peers who you were with,
They go on, right?
they go on. They
Yeah.
go to Bullock. They do all this stuff. So now their date of rank is greater than yours. So
Yeah.
they're going to
Yeah.
get promoted faster. And so you're just kind of waiting in purgatory until that happens.
Mickey, talk to us a little bit about, I know you work these cases early with the investigator, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about how important that relationship is with the investigator and how that can sometimes make a difference in a case. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the biggest thing, I think, is your access to your client. So you get your client, you talk to your client, you get the basic 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why, how. And then you develop an investigative plan. And based off that investigative plan, depending on the allegation, whatever it is, you decide what are the main things that you're looking for, right? Is there evidence out there that you need to acquire? Are there text messages? Are there witness statements? And then you go out there and you collect them. You go out there, you try to get that stuff. And if you can get it before anybody is talked to, that's great, because now if they change their story down the road, you've got credibility issues with that witness. So you work with that investigator early to collect those statements, because it might be a long time too before you actually have your hearing. So the memory is going to be better at that moment in time than later. So you want to get all that stuff early, be prepared for it. And really the reason why you want to do that is because you know it's going to take you about 2 weeks to sit down and woodshed with your client to get him. You're basically doing a crash course on a moot court. You're like going in there like, this is how
Right.
This is how you do an opening statement. This is how you cross-examine witnesses. This is how you give a closing argument, right? This is how you address the board. And you just go there. And I remember one of my clients, it was 2 hours a day, every day for like 10 days. We did that and went in there, and it went phenomenally well. But that's what you got to do to win these things. If you go in there and you're unprepared, you're going to get steamrolled. The board's going to have the investigation that the investigator or the IO, whoever that was, and they're just going to go off of that, and you're going to be like, "Sir, that's not true." Okay, show me why that's not true.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what could happen if you're not prepared.
You can decline to answer this question, but do you think that the boards know who has a lawyer and who doesn't, and alter their behavior based on it?
Mickey, I would decline to answer that question.
The boards, yeah, they definitely know because you're there with them.
Yeah, you're there in person with
you're
them.
there. You're there with them. You just
can't
can't
talk.
advocate.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but I mean,
I think it keeps them.
does it keep them in check? Is my question.
I think a little bit. It makes them. Sometimes they get a little agitated because they can't just throw their elbows around.
Right.
And what's final is final. But they have an obligation too to be fair and impartial.
Yeah.
Right. And if there's any hint that they're not, you document it and you send that up. Right now, the best opportunity you have is at the very beginning. I remember we did this. I was having my client hire the board members, and they didn't like it. But it's what you got to do sometimes to make sure you're getting a fair hearing.
Yeah.
Geez, that would be having your client hire the board, man.
Yeah.
That's going to decide their
ridiculous.
fate.
That's so crazy. The lawyer should be doing that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just the system is not. That's not how it should be, in my opinion. But
No,
do I
it
know?
shouldn't.
Hey,
It should not be that. Yeah.
So, what's your advice to the cadet, the parents going through this? Like, what are the 2, 3,
My
4
advice-
things that?
Yeah. Well,
I mean, obviously, one of them would be get a lawyer. I would think.
Well, I would determine whether you got a scholarship or not. If you don't have a scholarship, there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
They're gonna do what they want. If you do have a scholarship, decide whether you are fine with just enlisting. Because if you are, then you make that argument. Hey, he wants to serve no matter what, right?
Yeah.
If you don't want to enlist, then you're gonna have this debt potentially. But regardless, if you want to stay in, then you have to hire an attorney. You just got to. It's too foreign there's not even many military lawyers who do this kind of. You can't go to TDS. You can't go to an ADC and ask them for ROTC, but they don't know.
It's a niche within one. It's a niche within a niche, right? Like that's what it is. ROTC disenrollment boards. There's not very many of us that do it across the country. Mickey's one of the very best, and if they don't have a voice, there's a tendency they're going to get run over.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's it, man. I mean, it's not a very difficult process to understand, but when you're going through it, it just seems so crazy because you don't know. Yeah, you just don't know what your rights are.
I took my first PT test as an ROTC cadet, and I threw up in a garbage can. Fact.
Man, you left it all out.
Will they
there.
make
I
you
did.
run a half
I
mile?
did. No, it was 2 miles, and I think I had to run it in like 16 minutes or something. And I wasn't running.
That's not a bad. That's not a
Well,
bad
I wasn't
time.
running at all back then.
He
Right?
said he
Like,
ran 2 miles this morning.
I did run 2
What
miles.
was that,
this
like a
morning.
12-minute pace?
Oh, yeah. That's like just an enjoyment run. Get out and enjoy the nice weather. But, yeah, first PT test ever, ROTC cadet, I threw up in a trash can.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
I remember my first PT test. It sucked, man.
Yeah,
That
no, they're
sucked.
brutal. The first time, just the run, the push-ups, sit-ups weren't too bad. But, I mean, I was a baseball player. We didn't run and do anything. We run on first base.
Yeah,
right?
I remember in school it was like a 1 mile run is
Yeah.
all you did, and then you go in the middle. It's 2 miles. I'm man, that's so far.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't you think for the podcast we should do some kind of fitness test? We
Well,
can film it out in the parking lot.
When
No,
I
I
got
don't think we
to
should
when
do
I
it.
got to OBC, Officer Basic Course, I made the mistake. We had a 1 mile test run to like get a feel for your fitness, and I made the gigantic mistake that I would not make now of running it as hard as I possibly could.
Oh, yeah.
And I was
In
like
the run group one.
smoked, and they put me in run group 1. There was like 5 run groups, and I was in run group 1. Dude, I lasted like 3 days. I was getting left behind.
So they categorize you based on how well you do in the initial?
yeah.
That's at the
yeah.
JAG school.
Yeah.
They do that.
No, this was Officer Base, or this was at I guess DCC. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is when we did the thing. Yeah. So
Nobody told you, hey, dude, take it easy.
No, you
don't.
don't know anybody. You just show up and you're there with a bunch of lawyers that are going to be JAGs, and some guys have prior service like Mickey, and some guys don't. And I was nervous about, I wanted to like show off and show that I was in good enough shape
Yeah.
to be in the Army. And dude, I ran it crazy hard, and I ended up in run group 1, and that lasted literally 3 days. They dropped me to run group 3, and that's where I stayed for I guess DCC.
They're
was
still
8
talking
weeks
about
or
the guy that
something.
went from 1 to 3.
They might be
in the same week.
No, there's other people that are more famous, like the gal that shot herself in the foot at the range. That story never gets, that story's passed on from generation to generation.
I'm just thinking the ultimate humiliation in the run groups is if you're the guy who's falling back. They got to circle around. Everybody's looking at you. They circle around and come back behind you.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Did you make it up O Hill without stopping?
I think I was in RG2,
Yeah.
Group 2. But we weren't running like super fast.
Yeah.
I think they let you release run on the way down.
I think so. I think
because
that
it was
sounds
so
What's
dang
release
steep.
run?
So typically when you run, you're running in formation.
Yeah.
And these were like squad size elements, so like 5, 6, maybe 10 folks, and you're just running in a line, and everybody's maybe arm length apart, like that, and you just keep that throughout the whole time. A release run is basically you can break out of formation, you just run.
Anybody goes anywhere.
Yeah, you go, whatever you want.
Yeah.
And O Hill is this hill that they have in Charlottesville, Virginia, and it's this huge. It's right there by the University of Virginia. It's a huge hill. Huge, and you run up. It's really a mountain, I think. I don't know what it is.
It's like a mountain, yeah.
And the way up stinks. Like you're sucking wind, but the way down, man, it's like this.
Yeah.
And you are stomping your feet because you're trying not to fall down.
Yeah.
And so you're slamming your feet down, and you're just doing. I mean, you're doing damage to your
runners will
joints.
tell you going downhill is a lot harder. My wife, she'll say, going downhill is a lot.
Well, it's harder on your knees. It's
Yeah.
harder on your knees and stuff. But back when we were doing that stuff, I was in my mid to late 20s, I think. Nothing hurt then, right? You were just in good shape. You could run, you could lift. You didn't need to sleep much.
I had just turned 30, I think, and that was.
I think I was 27 when I went.
How
through
come when our
Officer Basic course.
podcast discussions go to physical fitness, we never talk about present day? It's always the past.
Oh, we're not. We do what we need to do to stay in decent shape now.
There you go.
It is what it is.
There you
We're
go.
a little
Yeah.
older. Mickey's like 50, and I'm 36.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Mickey's 38.
Your old boy here is pushing 50, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, do we have anything else on? We kind of got off topic, but
No,
we can do that.
I think, listen, the reality is ROTC, you really need a professional to help you out with that stuff because it is so foreign. It is a different, like Rob said, it's a niche within a niche. And it's the process is pretty simple once you've gone through it a couple of times. But typically, the clients this is the only time they're going to go through
Yeah,
it. So
for sure.
you're going to need somebody there
Be
to
lucky
guide
if they
you.
know anybody that's gone through it.
Yeah,
You know?
100%.
That's right. And understand the culture. Being prior military ourselves, we understand the culture. I think that's key as well.
Yeah.
I mean, several times I've picked up the phone and called the PMS just to talk to them.
Yeah.
Right, just to see kind of what they're thinking, what they know about the cadet, what they might recommend, and they'll talk to you
Yeah.
a lot of times. Some of them are a little standoffish, but most of them are like, they've been in the military a long time. That's typically their last assignment before they retire.
Is that right?
Yeah, so they don't really care if they talk to you or not because they're punching out in the next year or two.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Well, another great episode, another great day. Military Justice Today podcast. Robert Capovilla, Mickey Williams. I'm Matt Stroziak. We'll catch up with all you next time.
This session is adjourned.